What's up guys, Eli with Eli Tomalka Woodworks here today. With the help of Promise Epoxy, I'm going to be showing you how to make a Lazy Susan just like this one. So stay tuned. I started woodworking when I was just a young guy. My dad built our house when I was 3 years old. He had an architect's brain and was always ever improving our home. So we would do home renovation sort of stuff and home improvement sort of things together. That's where I started running machines like miter saws and sanders, and high school came along and picked up fine woodwork. Started working with hardwoods, started falling in love with wood grain and everything it has to offer, and that's where it all started. Eli Tomalka Woodworks, I say my established date was 2019. High school, I was going to school for woodworking and furniture design. And I had a lot of offcuts with that sort of thing, and obviously a lot of wood around me, being in a school setting, a big shop. So I got the idea, or was kind of getting inspiration online and milling up hardwood and creating these little cutting boards to pay for my beer in college. So made an Instagram for my work and kind of used that as an opportunity to make a portfolio online. And so that first same Instagram I have today, that was really my introduction to kind of the business side of things prior to COVID, which ended up leading me to this area and blooming into the scale I've got it at now. Alrighty, so I'm gonna chat with you guys about how to decide which slabs are going in your Lazy Susan and which shape you're going to go for. And today I'm going to be using these flame maple burl slab chunks for the Lazy Susan. We're going to get these prepped up to go in the mold and get ready for epoxy. So first off, I picked these burls up online from my burl source out in Oregon, Worldwide Burl. I was looking for a book match pair. So as you can see, these are a direct book match, which means it was a bigger piece of wood that was sliced into slim pieces. First thought with these was go round, kind of eliminating this outside long edge. So I've got these preset round molds in which I'm gonna kind of get an idea for what it's gonna look like inside of the mold when we're gonna go and pour it. So this is our 24-inch round mold that we're going to be using for this. I'm just trying to capture as much of that interesting burl edge as I can on the front side here especially. And I'm just going to go ahead and trace it out, kind of just go around the edge here. So I grabbed some bar clamps here. I'm going to go ahead and find an edge here. And one more on this side. Beautiful. All right, so now I'm going to take our shaped slab live edge burl chunks. I'm going to go ahead and poke some unstable wood out of them. There are some softer spots, and you can kind of see them in this chunk as grayish dark. I'm just going to go ahead and do it by hand with some chisels. So I'm just going to kind of work down some of this wood. So I'll go through, pull out all the dark areas in this depression. And another valuable part about doing this is opening up a super cool spot for epoxy to sit down in your mold, harden up, and create a cool aesthetic and a natural depression of your Lazy Susan. Alrighty, so now that we got our burl chunks all shaped up, dug out, ready to go for epoxy, it's time to prep the mold. So we've got our preset mold here. Same one we use to shape the outline and get our pieces ready for fitting. What we've got to do now is make sure we've got a dust-free mold and then get it all lubed up with our dry lubricant. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit this with some air now. So a lot of people do use some sort of mold release with their molds. This is a preset plastic mold. Ideally you don't have to, but I prefer to just to get rid of any hiccups possibly you might have with demolding. And this you can pick up at any local hardware store. This is just a standard dry lubricant, machine lubricant for any old machine. It works great for this application. So just make sure you're covering all surfaces that may get hit with epoxy to make sure that that bond isn't as strong. Cool. So now that our mold is prepped up, we're going to go ahead and drop our work pieces into the mold. Alrighty, now our work pieces are in the mold, orientated how we anticipated them to be originally. At this stage, we're going to go ahead and grab our weights. Personally, I like to use just any old landscaping brick. You can get these guys at Lowe's, and we're going to use some sort of packing tape or Tyvek tape to tape off the bottom of these bricks. Just in case we're over pouring and there's epoxy on the top surface of these pieces of burl, it's not going to bond to the very coarse surface of this brick, rather the tape, and it'll make it a lot easier when we go to demold these pieces. So that's all set up and time to mix up some epoxy. So if you're not in a well ventilated space like my shop here, a big area, maybe you're in a basement or an attic, something like that, definitely make sure you're wearing a respirator when mixing your epoxy. And then I'm also going to throw some gloves on here. Want to limit the possibility of the chemical touching your hand at any point through mixing. And then safety glasses, as you are going to be hand mixing. The weight of one chemical is lighter or heavier than the other. So it does get a little bit awkward when you're mixing it up. You want to just take that preventative measure to make sure it's not getting in your eye or eyes at all. So we've got our bucket here. Generally, I'm doing a lot of small pours and then working my way up to a full pour. With this guy being a little bit bigger, this is a 2-foot mold. So we're going to go ahead and do a bigger quantity of that same technique. With this, I'm actually going to do my 3D layering technique, which is a base layer of epoxy that's pigmented, and then a second layer of epoxy that's clear. So once this pigmented layer sets up for a couple days, it's going to harden up, and then we're going to scratch that layer up with some sandpaper, and then come through with a clear layer. Let that sit another couple of days until it's nice and hard and fully cured. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix up my first layer of resin here, pigmented layer to go in this Lazy Susan mold with my burl chunks. So I'm gonna use our Promise Deep Pour Epoxy. I like to start with part B because that is the 1 part of the 2-to-1 ratio, and I can kind of do my math as I'm going. I know I'm gonna use a lot of epoxy for this, so I'm definitely gonna fill this 144 ounce bucket here. So the math on that is pretty simple. So we're looking at 48 ounces. And then we're topping off the rest of the 144 ounces with our part A, the epoxy portion. $144 ounces there. So my pigment of choice for this round of Lazy Susan, I'm gonna go ahead and use a pretty standard mica pigment. This is a metallic pigment, so it's got that good little bit of sheen in there, and I like to add a little bit extra, so I kind of eyeball this portion. With the pigment, it's pretty hard to mess up if you're doing multiple pours of the same layer. It's kind of hard to mess up the pigmentation
amount in the epoxy. And if you do, you can just kind of mix it in there. And then this guy is just a little bit of that extra metallic sheen going in there. It's gonna add a lot of cool figure in the way the pigment sits up. So this epoxy's settling up really nice. Making sure to scrape the sides and the bottom. It was 2018, 2019 was my freshman year of college. I was in school, kind of sticking to what I was taught in regards to building furniture and not as much of a use with epoxy at all. I picked up some cookie molds, I believe it was. That was an Amazon purchase. I was like broke. I had like no money to spend on epoxy. Didn't work with any wood. I think I had beer bottle caps, of course. Dropped those caps into the molds and with the epoxy and just really got my first taste of what it's like to work with that in my dorm room in college. So that was my first exposure with epoxy and the medium itself, and trying to sell those coasters as some beer money in college. So that was my first time. Yeah. Now that our epoxy is thoroughly mixed up, I'm gonna go ahead and get this base layer poured in our mold here with our burl chunks. I like to kind of strategize prior to pouring, picking out those areas where I know I'm gonna try to, eventually the epoxy is gonna work its way into these little crevices, but I'm just impatient. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour it right into those spots and get an eye of what this is gonna look like in the end. So get our trusty bucket here. She's seen a couple pours, so she's a little rusty. Cool. A lot of people like to come in and kind of do a big swirl or use some sort of stick to kind of play with it. But in regards to my style, I like to let the epoxy do its thing just like the wood would. So the wood would grow and obviously form its own deformities and stuff like that. So if the epoxy needs mixed up, I can go in and kind of mess with it. But it's so thin right now and just starting to form. So I'm gonna let it do its thing. Now this guy is gonna go ahead and sit for a couple days. This base layer, we're gonna let that sit in a climate controlled area like my shop here for about, I'd say 48 hours at a minimum, until it gets rock hard. You can feel how hard it is. Once that has hardened up all the way, I like to hit it with like an 80, 120 grit. And that's when we're gonna make that surface for that second clear layer to grab, to have a texture bond per se instead of a chemical bond. So we'll be able to take a look inside from the top, see these crazy curly burl edges. And I've got one in my smaller 18-inch round mold. So we're gonna go ahead and grab that Lazy Susan and demold it right now. Alrighty, so we're gonna proceed with demolding this Lazy Susan now that our epoxy is nice and set up after a couple days of curing. It's nice and hard to the touch. No visible issues or soft spots. So we're gonna go ahead and get this demolded. So a little bit of tension on the edges of my preset mold here is gonna help it release nice and easy. So at this point, we're just able to flip it over and hopefully she falls right out right away. And just like that. We've got the back side, which obviously gained some epoxy, but we are gonna get some epoxy on the bottom side that we'll have to remove in the milling process. But our top, nice and ready and beautiful, ready for the next steps. So we're gonna go ahead and run this through the drum sander and take that top side down. Now it's gonna take a few passes on a drum sander, but I don't have a planer wide enough to accommodate this 18-inch round size. So we're gonna use a few passes on the drum sander with the grit set at 80. and get this top side nice and pretty, and then repeat on the bottom side to get that wood exposed on both sides, nice and flat and prepped up for finish sanding and shaping with a router. Alrighty, so at this stage of the Lazy Susan build, it's time to shape the edges of this round. So I'm gonna do that with a router. Alrighty, so we went ahead and got our edges shaped up, so now it's time to get into finish sanding all our shaped edges and surfaces. So we did go with a round over. First, we're gonna sand our faces down. So we've got all these marks from the drum sander. Likely if you ran it through a planer or any machine, there is gonna be some sort of marking. So I am going to actually reverse in grit. I'm gonna go with a 60, go up to 80, then 120, 180, and then I'm gonna water pop it, or I'm gonna use alcohol rather than water, but I'm gonna pop that grain, raise it, and then jump into 240, and I'm gonna keep going because this has a clear layer of epoxy on this top layer. So I wanna make sure to get it super finely sanded so we can see through it really easily. So I'm gonna go through and hit it with the 240, and this is all sides and round overs and everything. And then I jump to an 800 and then do a 1500 grit. And when you're sanding epoxy, if you're not using a sander with a built-in dust collection system like Festool or a lot of other brands that have modular HEPA rated filtration systems within their vacuum, make sure to wear a respirator if you're not using one of these systems and just a normal sander, because it is going to kick up a lot of that toxic dust, which you do not want to be breathing in. So I'm going to go ahead and get going with the Rotex here. In regards to what we're using this Lazy Susan for, I want this to be a multifunctional Lazy Susan, so I'm going to go ahead and finish it with a food safe finish. So I'm going to go ahead and fill all these little pinholes. We're going to use CA glue and an activator. So with the burl, there's a lot of tension within the grain. When they slab this out and release that tension, the grain will open up in these little tiny pinholes. So I think that's what's going on with that. It's quite common with the burl. Any other wood you use will likely have some sort of grain openings or pinholes or something that you're going to want to come and fill before opening it up as a food safe option, because we don't want any meat or cheese or anything getting down into these little tiny pinholes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. This is a pretty standard CA glue. I'm just going to go to town on filling those up. So this activator, you can go ahead and just hit lightly all of your CA glue spots, and it's going to immediately harden it. So you can go and proceed with sanding these guys down. All right, so now that we've got it sanded up to the 180 grit, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use an alcohol pop per se. Spray it down with alcohol. We'll get a good idea of what it's going to look like finished. So I'll grab that. Got it in one of these little sprayers here. Makes it nice and easy to apply. Just spray a little bit on. The epoxy is obviously not soaking it up or anything or raising the grain per se, but it's cool to get a good look at what the piece is going to look like. Alrighty, so with all my pieces, furniture, charcuterie trays, Lazy Susans, I love to add a brand. So it's my logo, but it's pretty simple, and I'm going to go ahead and add that now. All right, so I'm gonna proceed with the Food Safe mineral oil. It's a white label mineral oil. Make sure to spray off your workpiece. gonna dump some oil on the top here and let it kind of disperse itself. So you can already see that crazy epoxy figure because we did that pigmented base layer, and then the clear on top makes it so you can see right into those crazy burl edges. And this is what extremely figured flame maple burl looks like when all finished up. So you can already see that shining through. Work it all the way around the edges. Because we sanded to such a high grit, we're able to see straight through even the sides, which is super, super aesthetic. So we've got the top all dialed in. You can kind of bring some of that oil over to the back side. And then we're gonna have Lazy Susan hardware on the back, but as a woodworker, we always wanna finish every side exactly the same as if it was the top. Drop that oil right on there. Obviously the epoxy is not gonna be soaking up the oil, but that burl, I'm just gonna soak that up overnight. We'll come back, wipe the excess oil off the epoxy side, and then proceed with my board butter, which is the sealer.
What advice could you give to somebody else who is looking to start a creative business how you did?
Yeah, my advice is try not to say no to anything in the start, and just seize every opportunity in regards to outreach and get uncomfortable. That's actually my biggest go-to when talking to small business owners, and whether it be creative or not, especially creative, get uncomfortable because you're trying stuff that people have never done on a daily basis, or you're cutting costs in one way, shape, or form to accommodate your business. I'd say definitely get uncomfortable. So I sell my products pretty much right now 100% in person. My dad, he's a big believer in this phrase or acronym TWIG, which is take what is given. So I was given a lot of opportunity last year just by building rapport with locals and using my old job experience to meet folks. And I took every opportunity I could to go out to the markets, literally in person, 10 by 10, set up a booth, sort of farmers markets and craft markets, festivals. I ended up doing, I believe, over 60 events just during market season last year to speak with folks and hand my card out and sell products in person. And that was pretty much my bread and butter in business. And I do sell online, my smaller pieces, and I do list my furniture on my website as well. But yeah, you can find me in person or online. And yeah. Alrighty, so our Lazy Susan has sat and soaked up that mineral oil overnight. I went ahead and got all the excess mineral oil off the top of the epoxy. And so now it's time for our seal coat, our sealer finishing product, which is food safe. And this is Eli's board butter. So this is a mineral oil, beeswax, vitamin E, coconut oil blend, all organic materials. And a good friend of mine, Honeybee Bliss here in Hendersonville, North Carolina, supplies the beeswax straight from here in Hendersonville. It's all organic, and it smells a little bit like honey, so that's a huge plus. No added scents or anything, it's all natural. And you can find Eli's board butter on my website, elitomalkawoodworks.com, and that will be in the board maintenance portion of the website. So a little bit goes a long way. You can kind of stretch a little bit out on your fingers and work it into all those pores of the wood and the epoxy, making it water resistant and an overall great piece. Double check it in the light, make sure all the surfaces are covered, and then go ahead and set this up on your painter pyramids. A couple of stickers will work too, just so it can get some airflow on top and bottom. This is gonna sit for 15 or so minutes, then we'll come back and buff it with the wool pad and the drill. So once again, this is just a standard drill with a chuck that grabs the buffing wheel attachment for the drill, and you can just go kind of in a circular motion around.
Just wiping away the excess. So now our Lazy Susan is all set up and ready for hardware. So I'm gonna go ahead and find the center on the back and then apply the hardware for the Lazy Susan. And so, got my Lazy Susan hardware here. This is an Amazon special. Apply a little bit of pressure so I can mark out where I'm going to pre-drill for my screws. Make sure you're not drilling through the top of this by marking with a drill stop, little bit or some tape or something like that. Just marking where you're gonna stop when you're drilling. Cool. So now we can check out our Lazy Susan in motion. Once again, this is food safe, so charcuterie Lazy Susan, multifunctional piece of functional art to be enjoyed for generations. Once again, Eli Tomalka Woodworks. Hopefully you guys enjoy and build one of these guys. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. It's Eli Tomalka Woodworks on Instagram, Eli Tomalka Woodworks on Facebook, EliTomalkaWoodworks.com, and then make sure to like and subscribe, follow Promise Epoxy, and thanks for watching. Beautiful. She works. That scared me a little bit. It just goes. Zoom.